An 11-year-old homeless boy walks into a hospital and says he knows how to wake a billionaire's daughter from a coma. What happens next leaves doctors speechless and a nation divided. It was just after 9:30 in the morning when the sliding glass doors at Memorial Baptist Hospital in San Antonio parted, and a small figure stepped inside. Nobody noticed at first. Hospitals are always in motion, stretchers rolling by, staff checking charts, relatives waiting anxiously in plastic chairs. One more kid in a hoodie didn't stop the rhythm. Tyrese Mallory walked in like he didn't belong there, but also like he didn't care. 11 years old, wiry, quiet, and carrying a torn green backpack that looked like it had been through hell. What caught the eye of the front desk nurse wasn't that he was alone. It was the way he clutched something in his hand, tight, like it might blow away if he let go. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked, barely looking up from her screen. "I need to see Sierra Kensington," he said. The nurse paused. She looked up. "I'm sorry." "Who?" He took a step closer, unfolding a photo. It was faded, corners bent, but you could still make out a girl's smiling face. Light brown hair pulled into a ponytail, standing next to an older woman near what looked like a community center wall covered in kids' paintings. "She's here," Tyrese said, quiet but certain. "She's asleep. I know how to wake her up." There was a beat of silence. Then another nurse behind the desk stifled a chuckle. "Kid," the first nurse said, trying to sound gentle. "This is a hospital, not a—" "I'm serious," Tyrese said. "She talks to me. In my sleep. She says she's stuck. And she's scared." That was when security was called. A large man in a blue polo walked up, hand on his belt, and gently motioned Tyrese to the side. "Come on, let's go talk over here." But Tyrese held his ground. "She's in room 416. She has a bracelet on her left wrist, red thread braided into it. I saw it." That got the nurse's attention. Room 416 was indeed Sierra Kensington's. And yes, she did have a red thread bracelet. Her grandmother tied it on her wrist for luck before the boat ride that ended with Sierra pulled unconscious from the water. The bracelet hadn't been in any press photos. That detail wasn't public. The nurse turned to the guard. "Wait, hang on." But Tyrese had already sat down on the floor by the wall, folding his legs like he was prepared to wait all day. Downstairs, Victor Kensington had just finished another meeting with a neurologist. More jargon, more scans, more no changes. He hadn't slept well in days. The accident, only 3 weeks ago, had cracked his life open in places he didn't know existed. His wife had passed years ago. Sierra was all he had left, and she was unreachable. When a nurse knocked on the meeting room door and whispered something about a boy in the lobby, Victor nearly brushed it off. But when she mentioned the red thread, he stood up immediately. 5 minutes later, Tyrese found himself standing in front of Victor. Even in worn shoes and a dirty hoodie, he looked Victor dead in the eye. "How do you know my daughter?" Victor asked, voice cold, tired and controlled. "She came to the shelter once," Tyrese answered. "I think she forgot, but I didn't." Victor stared at him for a long second. "Why now?" "Because she called me," Tyrese said, "in my dreams, and I think she's trying to come back. But she doesn't know how." Victor could have laughed. He almost did. But something in the boy's voice stopped him. He wasn't begging. He wasn't pretending. He was just telling. "How long do you need?" Victor asked. 10 minutes. Victor looked at the head nurse, then back at Tyrese. "You get 5. If you pull anything weird, it ends." Tyrese just nodded once. But what happened inside that room, what that boy said, and what Sierra's body did, would change everything. Room 416 didn't feel like a place where a teenager should be spending her days. The blinds were half drawn. Machines blinked quietly in the background. A small TV mounted on the wall played a muted cooking show that no one was watching. Sierra Kensington lay still, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the ventilator beside her. She looked peaceful, like she was dreaming of something good. But everyone who walked into that room knew better. 3 weeks ago, Sierra had been at Canyon Lake with 2 friends and a private instructor. A weekend getaway, just a short escape from school and security guards. They'd taken a small boat out early. It wasn't supposed to be anything wild. But something hit them. Maybe a rock, maybe debris. The boat flipped. One friend surfaced immediately. The instructor pulled out the other. But Sierra stayed under for too long. By the time they pulled her out, she wasn't breathing. CPR worked. Kind of. Her heart beat. But she never woke up. Now here she was, surrounded by machines and questions. Doctors said it wasn't a coma in the traditional sense. Her brain showed activity, dream patterns, even, but her body wouldn't respond. They tried sensory stimulation, high-dose therapy, music, voices. Nothing worked. She just stayed somewhere else. Victor Kensington visited her twice a day, once in the morning, once late at night. He didn't know what else to do. He'd made his fortune designing predictive analytics software. He was used to answers. Certainty. But with Sierra, nothing computed. That morning he had nearly skipped his routine. The doctors hadn't said anything new. He was tired. But the boy in the hoodie wouldn't leave his head. Victor stood by the glass window of the room now, watching Tyrese enter slowly. The boy looked smaller in the wide space. He didn't ask for help. Didn't hesitate. Just walked up to Sierra's bedside and sat in the visitor's chair like he'd done it before. Then he started talking. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't try to sound important. His words came out like he was speaking to someone who'd been waiting for him. "You said it was dark," he murmured. "You said you couldn't find the door." Outside, Victor crossed his arms, watching. Inside, Tyrese pulled something from his backpack, a folded drawing, wrinkled at the edges. He placed it in Sierra's hand. "I brought this back," he said. "You told me to bring it when I came." "I remember." Sierra didn't move. The nurse standing next to Victor shifted. "We should get him out now." "Wait," Victor said. Something changed. The monitor tracking Sierra's brain activity spiked. Not by much, but enough. A nurse on duty tapped the screen. "That's new." Then Sierra's fingers twitched. Just once. Enough for Victor to flinch. "She moved," he whispered. "No, that could be involuntary," another nurse said quickly. "That's not necessarily a response." But the movement came again. This time, her thumb curled, like she was trying to hold the paper Tyrese had placed there. Victor stepped into the room now, not saying a word. Tyrese didn't look at him. He was still talking to Sierra. "I don't think you're stuck," he said softly. "I think you're scared to come back. But you don't have to be. I'm here." Sierra's eyelids fluttered, just for a moment. Her face tightened, like she was trying to frown. Then everything went still again. Tyrese stood up. "I should go now." Victor held up a hand. "Wait." The nurses were already checking her vitals. One of them was on the phone with the attending neurologist. Another had turned off the TV. Everyone in that room felt it. That strange tension, like something had just shifted, but no one knew how to explain it. Victor stared at the photo Sierra still held. "Where did you meet her?" he asked again. Tyrese slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Lubbock. A long time ago. She was drawing pictures at a shelter. I was just passing through. She gave me that one. Told me I'd know when to bring it back." Victor didn't believe in magic. Or fate. Or shared dreams. But right now, in that room, none of what he'd known seemed to matter. But the question still hung in the air. How did this boy, with no connection and no place to go, know things that were never public? Tyrese hadn't expected anyone to believe him. When he walked into that hospital, he was ready to be thrown out. He only wanted a chance. One moment with her. He felt like he owed her that. But now that it was happening, now that Victor Kensington, billionaire tech genius and father to the unconscious girl, had let him sit in her room, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt something closer to guilt. The photo in her hand still hadn't slipped. Her fingers curled faintly around it, and Tyrese couldn't stop watching her hand, as if it might offer some kind of signal. He'd spoken the words exactly as she said in his dreams. Word for word. She told him it mattered, that if he didn't say it that way, she might forget. But there were no more signs, no twitch, no fluttering eyelids. The room went still again. The nurse who had been watching from the doorway cleared her throat and stepped forward. "We should—" Victor raised a hand without looking. "1 more minute." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't even realize he was holding his breath until his chest started to ache. For a man who made decisions based on cold logic, Victor found himself wrapped in something completely unfamiliar. Hope. Tyrese lowered his voice and leaned in closer to Sierra. "I remember when you told me not to let them change me," he whispered. "You said the world would try, that people would look at me and think I was trouble, but you said I had to stay kind." The monitors gave off a quiet series of beeps, slightly faster, nothing dramatic. But the nurses weren't talking anymore. Victor stepped closer. The beeping continued, steady, alive. "You told me if I ever got scared again, I should find you," Tyrese said. "I was scared, so I came." He sat back. A long silence settled between the three of them. Then, barely there, Sierra's lips moved. Not a word, just a soft attempt at shape. The nurse ran to her side, checking her vitals again. Victor leaned in, heart thudding now. "Did she? I don't know yet," the nurse said quickly, almost afraid to sound too sure. "Could be reflex." "I saw it," Tyrese said. "She's close." The doctor on call, Dr. Rena Arwood, entered the room right then with a clipboard in one hand and a Bluetooth headset in her ear. She moved briskly, giving a quick look at Sierra's monitors. "She moved her lips?" she asked the nurse. "Yes, slight twitch." "And you're sure it wasn't residual?" "Positive." Dr. Arwood turned to Tyrese, scanning him like she wasn't sure whether to be impressed or furious. "What did you say to her?" Tyrese shrugged. "Just reminded her." "Of what?" "She used to be brave." There was no sarcasm in his voice, no theatrics, just plain old honesty. Something you don't hear much in places full of sterile air and doubt. Dr. Arwood nodded slowly. "Let's keep monitoring. I want an EEG in the next hour." Victor said nothing. He kept his eyes locked on his daughter. Tyrese stepped back, his face unreadable. "I should probably go now." Victor hesitated. "Where would you go?" "I'm fine," Tyrese said. "I don't stay in one place too long." Victor stared at the boy, trying to reconcile the facts in his head. A homeless child walks into a hospital, makes contact with his daughter no one can reach, says he knew her once, and something starts to change. He couldn't explain it. But deep down, something told him this wasn't over. "I want to know more," Victor said quietly. Tyrese looked at him. "So do I." Security walked him out, but no one grabbed his arm. They didn't shove or scold. They just let him go. The photo remained in Sierra's hand. Victor stayed by her side for hours that day. He didn't check emails, didn't return calls. He sat in that chair, watching her breathe, and every so often he thought he saw her mouth move. Late that night, while nurses were changing shifts, Sierra made a small noise, barely audible, a whisper lost in the air, but it was a start. And somewhere across town, Tyrese curled up behind a gas station dumpster, staring at the same moonlight that slipped through the hospital window. By the next morning, the hospital staff had questions no one could answer. Who let the kid in? Did anyone run a background check? Where did he even come from? Victor Kensington had questions too, but his were quieter, more personal. He wasn't asking out loud yet, but they simmered beneath every glance at his daughter. How could a stranger know the bracelet? How could he know what to say? The nurses remembered the boy's name. Tyrese Mallory. That much was clear. But when staff tried to enter him into the system, no matches came up. No school enrollment, no recent ER visits, no guardian contacts. "We've got nothing," the head of hospital security said. "Not even a birth certificate in the local records." That same morning, Nina Velasquez, a local freelance reporter covering the tech beat, got a call from a friend who worked night shift at the hospital. "You want a story?" her friend said. "There's a kid who might have just pulled off a miracle." By noon, Nina had already confirmed that Sierra Kensington's vitals had shifted after the boy's visit. She drove straight to the hospital, hoping to catch someone before the Kensington PR team put a lid on it. In the lobby, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through a blurry photo someone had taken of Tyrese the day before. Then she started asking around. A security guard confirmed the boy had slept outside the bus station a few times. Another worker mentioned seeing him at a shelter on Blanco Road the week before. That shelter had a name, St. Jerome's Outreach, and the woman who ran it, Leandra Duke, remembered Tyrese. Quiet boy, never gave his last name, But I saw the photo once, Leandra said, her voice low. Carried it like a lifeline. Said it was someone who'd helped him when he was younger. I thought maybe a lost sister or something. Did he say where he was from? Lubbock, maybe. He didn't talk much. But I know what fear looks like. That kid had it in his bones. Back at the hospital, Victor sat in Sierra's room, watching the monitor. He hadn't moved much in hours. Nurses came and went, adjusting tubes and wires, checking on meds. But he barely noticed them. He was staring at her face, trying to see if anything changed. At some point, he pulled out his phone and called a private investigator he'd used years ago for a business dispute. I need everything you can find on a boy named Tyrese Mallory, he said. About 11. Possibly from Lubbock. No parents listed. The voice on the other end responded immediately. You want it quiet or public? Quiet. Victor put down the phone and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Sierra hadn't moved again since last night's whisper, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was aware, somewhere behind those eyelids, fighting her way back. That afternoon, Nina showed up at the shelter. She sat down with Leandra again, and this time asked the one question she hadn't dared earlier. Did he ever say why he came to San Antonio? Leandra nodded. Said he had a dream, a real one. Kept saying, she's in trouble. She's waiting for me. I told him he was just confused, but he didn't budge. He left the next morning. Later that evening, Nina published a blog post, not for a big outlet, just her own site. The title was simple, The Boy with the Photo. The post went viral within hours. People started asking if the boy was gifted, psychic, or just lucky. Others said it was a scam. Some called it heartwarming. Others said it was exploitation. Victor didn't read it that night. He was still in room 416, watching the paper in Sierra's hand. He didn't notice when one of her fingers moved again. Not a twitch this time, an actual shift. As a nurse leaned in to adjust the IV, she blinked. Did she just... Victor stood up. What? She moved again. This one's different. Victor stepped closer. Sierra's lips parted slightly, and she exhaled. Not through the machine, but on her own. The nurse shouted for a doctor. Down the hallway, monitors flickered. Nurses converged. And outside, Tyrese sat behind a church steps a few miles away, watching traffic pass. He didn't know what was happening at that moment, but deep down, something told him she heard him. Again. But now that people were starting to notice him, the world that usually ignored boys like Tyrese was about to come in fast and loud. Tyrese didn't remember a lot about Lubbock. He remembered the cracked sidewalk outside the shelter, the sound of a woman yelling in the street 2 blocks down, the way the cafeteria always smelled like canned corn and boiled hot dogs. But most of all, he remembered the art table. It was the first place that ever felt like it didn't want anything from him. He was 8 back then. Still small, still scared, still pretending his mom would come back any day. That she hadn't really left him at the gas station on I-27. He was too young to understand why adults walked around with looks that made it clear they had already written him off. But that day, the day Sierra Kensington showed up with a group of volunteers from Austin, was different. She wasn't famous back then, not in a public way. Her father was already building his software empire, but she was just a 10-year-old girl with a sketchbook under her arm and a face that made people feel safe. Tyrese didn't talk much that day. He sat at the edge of the long folding table while the other kids laughed and smeared paint on paper plates. Sierra sat across from him and started drawing. You look like you've seen some things, she said without looking up. He didn't respond. She handed him a colored pencil. I'm Sierra. Still, nothing. I draw people I want to remember, she added, and that made him glance up. Her fingers were already moving fast across the page, eyes darting between his face and the paper. She didn't talk like other kids. She didn't ask if he had parents or where he slept. She didn't talk about TV shows or school or friends. She just said, sometimes when I can't sleep, I look at my drawings and try to remember who I'm supposed to be. Tyrese didn't understand it then, but he felt something shift inside him. She finished the drawing and held it out. It wasn't him, not really, but it was someone who looked like he might have had a future. She had drawn him smiling, eyes wide open. She'd added a red line between his fingers, like a bracelet that didn't exist. "You can keep it," she said, "in case you ever get really lost. Maybe you'll know when to use it." He folded the paper carefully, like it was gold. It went into the front pocket of his hoodie and stayed there through every shelter, every overnight bus ride, every closed door. 3 years later, he was in San Antonio, not because he wanted to be, but because the dreams had started coming back. At first, they didn't make sense. A girl's voice, soft and panicked. Then flashes of light, water, the feeling of drowning without getting wet. And then her face, always her face. He recognized her the second he saw the news clip on the convenience store TV. The name didn't even register at first. But the face? That was the girl from Lubbock, the one who said to come find her if he ever felt truly lost. That night, Tyrese walked 3 miles to Memorial Baptist. He didn't know how it would go, but the feeling was too strong to ignore. Now, sitting outside the church steps again, he pulled the folded drawing from his backpack. It was creased, edges soft, but still intact. He stared at it, fingers moving across the lines Sierra had drawn. "I remembered," he whispered. Back at the hospital, Victor Kensington was looking through old boxes in Sierra's bedroom. Not the ones curated by assistants, but the ones she'd hidden in her closet. School folders, old ribbons, a taped-up notebook she kept locked with a broken zipper. He almost didn't look inside. But curiosity won. Inside were charcoal sketches, dozens of them. People she'd seen, some famous faces, some classmates. And then, one near the back, folded in half, a small boy sitting on the edge of a curb. The drawing was labeled, in Sierra's small, careful handwriting, "In case I forget." Victor sat back in her desk chair, stunned. How was it possible? He turned the sketch over. On the back, in faded pencil, she had written, "Ty, quiet, brave, find me if I'm ever too far gone." He stared at it for a long time. But if this boy truly knew her, if this wasn't just coincidence, then Victor had no choice but to look at everything he believed in and start questioning all of it. Victor Kensington didn't usually deal with emotions in the traditional sense. He ran companies, negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and made decisions that shaped industries. But sitting on his daughter's bedroom floor with her sketchbook in his lap, he felt completely hollowed out. The portrait of the boy, Ty, as she had written, was unmistakable. The same sharp nose, the same watchful eyes. It wasn't just a random face. It was the boy from the hospital. The boy who said he knew how to reach her. He turned the page over again, reading the line she wrote months ago. "Find me if I'm ever too far gone." Victor hadn't known about the sketchbook. Her therapist said she was expressive, private. They told him to give her space. He always respected boundaries, but now he wished he'd asked more questions. He called his investigator immediately. "Start with Lubbock. There was an event at a shelter, maybe 3 years ago. I need every piece of footage, every name, every logbook. Someone must have recorded it." That same day, Tyrese found himself back at St. Jerome's. The staff recognized him right away and let him inside. He didn't say much, just asked if he could rest for a few hours. Leandra Duke brought him a sandwich and sat beside him. "You've been all over the internet," she said quietly. Tyrese looked up. "Some people are saying you healed that girl. Others think you faked it." He stayed quiet. "I don't think it was fake," she added. "I just talked to her," he said. "That's all." "But how did you know what to say?" Tyrese looked down at the worn drawing still folded in his hand. "She told me in my dreams. She just talked. I didn't know if it was real, but it felt real." Leandra didn't question him further. She'd worked with too many kids to dismiss that kind of truth. Meanwhile, Victor's investigator sent him a grainy video clip taken by a volunteer during the Shelter Art event. It showed Sierra at a folding table, laughing, surrounded by kids. At one point, the camera lingered just long enough to catch a small boy in a grey hoodie sitting across from her. Victor froze the video. Same eyes, same slouched posture, same kid. He sat back in his leather chair and exhaled. This was real. He opened his laptop and pulled up the hospital's security footage. He had access to everything now. He clicked through the files until he found the clip from Tyrese's first entrance. The way the boy walked in, hesitant but determined. The photo in his hand. The words he used. "She's stuck. She's scared." Victor played that line again and again. He wasn't sure if it was science, or luck, or some kind of connection beyond explanation. But something inside him had shifted. That night, Sierra's eyes fluttered again. This time, her heart rate rose. Not dramatically, but noticeably. A nurse adjusted the IV and called in Dr. Arwood. "She's stabilizing," the doctor said. "Not waking yet, but we're seeing clearer responses to stimuli." Victor asked, "Does it make sense that it only started after that boy came?" Dr. Arwood hesitated. "We don't know enough to say anything for sure. But before him, she was flat." "She was unresponsive," the doctor admitted. What he said. Maybe it triggered something emotional. Maybe she's finding her way back. It's not impossible, Victor nodded, though his mind was 1,000 miles away. He picked up Sierra's sketchbook again. There were more drawings, some surreal, some childish, but one stood out. A door in the middle of a lake, floating above the water, with a tiny figure waiting beside it. The title scribbled underneath read, "For When I Get Lost." Victor stared at it for a long time, running a finger along the edge of the page. That night, he sent a message to the nurse's station. "If the boy comes back, do not turn him away." Tyrese, meanwhile, was sitting alone in the shelter's hallway. A volunteer offered him a blanket, and he took it without speaking. He didn't know what came next, but he knew the dreams weren't done. He could still hear her voice. "I'm almost there. Just don't stop talking." But now that the truth was surfacing, more people were about to get involved, and not all of them would be on his side. It didn't take long for the media to catch up. By the next morning, Sierra Kensington's slow but undeniable improvement was the second most searched topic online. The first? A grainy image of an 11-year-old boy holding a crumpled photo in the lobby of a hospital, captioned, "The boy who spoke her awake." News outlets from Austin to Phoenix picked it up. The stories all followed the same thread. A homeless boy claims he can wake a billionaire's daughter. And somehow, something shifted. Some called it a miracle. Some called it manipulation. Within 24 hours, national news trucks pulled into the parking lot at Memorial Baptist. Cameras flashed through the front windows, anchors set up just outside the emergency wing. A few even tried to sneak into Sierra's floor until hospital security pushed them out. Victor had to hire a private PR team to handle the noise. His phone rang non-stop. "How should we respond?" one rep asked him. "The public's already forming theories." Victor didn't want to be part of a narrative. He wasn't interested in headlines. But every time he turned on the television, there was Tyrese. His name, his photo, debates over his credibility. Online, the theories got louder. Some thought it was a PR stunt. Others swore Tyrese was the long-lost son of a nurse or a medium. A few more cynical voices said the entire hospital staff was in on it. But none of them knew the truth, that a scared, tired boy had walked in, said her name, and somehow that had meant more than 1,000 specialists. Meanwhile, Tyrese stayed quiet. He hadn't gone back to the hospital, not because he didn't want to, but because it was starting to feel dangerous. People recognized him now. A woman at the gas station tried to take his photo. 2 teens cornered him behind a convenience store and asked if he was that psychic kid. When he didn't answer, one of them shoved him and ran. That night, he didn't sleep. At the shelter, Leandra Duke kept him close. She moved him to a back room, out of sight from volunteers with phones and curious visitors. "They're going to keep coming," she warned. "You sure you're okay?" "I just wanted to help her," he said. "That's all I came for." Across town, Victor was having trouble sleeping too. He watched his daughter through the window again, just like before. Her vitals were better. Her color looked warmer, but her eyes were still shut. That night, she whispered something again. Not a dream sound, an actual word. It was faint. A nurse heard it and stepped closer. "Ty, The nurse leaned in. "Can you say that again?" But Sierra didn't repeat it. Her lips went still. The next morning, Victor met with Dr. Arwood in the hallway. "Can that name coming from her? Can that be real?" "It's not outside the realm of possibility," the doctor replied. "We've seen coma patients respond to emotional memory. If this boy made a connection years ago, it may be lodged in her subconscious. She remembered him before I did," Victor said. Dr. Arwood didn't know how to respond to that. Later that day, the news reached Tyrese. Leandra came into the room with a small radio. "She said your name," she told him. Tyrese didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood up. "I need to go back. It might be chaos there. Are you ready for that?" He looked down at the drawing in his hand. "She's trying. Then I'll drive you myself." And so, with no cameras, no announcements, no reporters waiting, Leandra's old sedan pulled into the hospital parking garage, and Tyrese walked through a back entrance, escorted by a nurse who remembered him. He carried no bag this time, just the photo. Victor met him outside room 416. "She said your name," Victor said. Tyrese didn't look surprised. "I heard her too." Victor opened the door. But this second visit wouldn't just change Sierra's condition. It would force everyone watching to confront the possibility that something bigger was at play. Victor stayed just outside the room as Tyrese stepped through the door. A nurse remained close by, but quiet. There was no crowd this time, no reporters in the hallway. Just the boy, the girl, and the steady sound of medical equipment ticking away like background noise. Tyrese walked up to the side of Sierra's bed and sat in the same chair he'd used before. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her face. She hadn't changed much since that day in Lubbock, even if her life had. Her hair was a little longer, her cheeks thinner, but her expression still carried the same calmness he remembered. It struck him again how out of place she looked in this room, like she belonged somewhere warmer, louder, freer. He leaned forward and spoke, voice soft. "You're still in there, huh?" No answer. But her hand moved again. This time, slowly, purposefully. Victor saw it from the door and stepped inside. "She's responding faster now," the nurse whispered. Tyrese didn't stop. "They keep trying to figure out how I know you," he said. "But you remember, don't you? The shelter? The drawings? That paper you gave me?" He paused. "I thought I made it all up, but you remembered, even when I didn't." He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. Suddenly, her lips parted. One word. "Door." The nurse froze. Victor took a step forward. "Tyrese didn't move. She always drew doors," he said, "even back then. She said it was her way out when things got heavy." Victor looked at the nurse. Was that a real word? The nurse was already pressing a button. "She said something meaningful. We need to document this." Within minutes, Dr. Arwood rushed in, along with another physician and a tech with a portable EEG machine. Victor stayed near the wall, watching everything, but his mind was elsewhere, piecing together fragments of the last few days, trying to stitch them into a picture that made any kind of sense. The word door stuck with him. Later that evening, he made a call to his private investigator again. "Focus on the shelter records in Lubbock," he said. "I want a full list of every volunteer Sierra interacted with. Any sign of recurring contact." A few hours later, the investigator called back. "I think I found something weird," the man said. "It's not much, but there's a note in the logbook from the day Sierra volunteered. It mentions her and a boy sitting for a long time together. They drew pictures. No name, but one of the other volunteers wrote that she seemed unusually focused on him. Any record of contact after that? No. But here's the strange part. There's a therapist's note from a few months later, buried in her early medical records. It mentions she kept talking about a boy named Ty, who made her feel calm when everything felt like too much. She didn't mention a last name. Her mother thought it was just an imaginary friend." Victor sat with that for a long time. So it wasn't just a memory tucked away. It had stayed with her, long enough to echo across years, long enough to resurface even after trauma. That night, Victor went back into Sierra's room alone. The lights were low. Machines hummed quietly. He sat beside her bed and took her hand in his. It was the first time he'd touched her like that since the accident. He whispered, "I think you knew what you were doing that day, even if I didn't." She didn't respond, but her fingers tightened slightly around his. Downstairs, Tyrese waited in the lobby with Leandra. "Did she really say a word?" she asked. He nodded. "She said, 'door.'" Leandra exhaled. "What do you think that means?" "I think she's trying to open one," he said. "For herself. Or maybe for both of us." Back in room 416, the doctors reviewed Sierra's latest EEG readings. They were still below what they'd call fully conscious, but they were better than anything seen in the last 3 weeks. "She's trending upward," Dr. Arwood said to her team. "This might be real, but with the world now watching and the medical community looking for answers, the next moment between Tyrese and Sierra would leave no room for doubt." By the time Tyrese walked into Sierra's room for the 3rd time, something felt different. Not just in her face or the way her fingers moved, but in the air itself. He noticed how the nurses didn't treat him like a problem anymore. They weren't whispering behind clipboards or looking over their shoulders. They were watching with the kind of quiet attention people give to things they can't explain but don't want to mess up. Victor stood in the corner, arms crossed but not cold. His expression had changed too. Less of the guarded businessman, more of a father who wasn't sure what to believe, but was starting to want to. Tyrese didn't waste time. He sat beside Sierra and rested his elbow on the side of the bed. His voice was steady, like he'd rehearsed it in his sleep. "I think you're close," he said. "I think you've been walking toward that door this whole time." He pulled the folded drawing from his jacket pocket. Wrinkled now, edges barely holding together. "I still have this," he said. "You remember it?" Her breathing changed. Slight, but noticeable. Monitors responded. One nurse stepped closer to the screen. Victor leaned in silently. "You told me once," Tyrese continued, "that people stop listening when you stop smiling. You said that's why you always kept a little one on, even when you were sad." He looked at her face, waiting for a twitch, a sign, anything. But Sierra lay still. Then her eyelids flickered. Not once, not faintly. Full motion, like someone trying to break through sleep. "Doctor!" the nurse called out. "We've got movement, significant!" Dr. Arwood rushed in moments later, but Tyrese didn't get up. He leaned closer. "You're doing it," he whispered. "Come on." Sierra's eyes blinked open, slowly, like light hurt. She winced, and her lips trembled. Then, quiet and rough, but clear enough for every person in the room to hear. "Ty!" the nurse gasped. Dr. Arwood leaned in. "Sierra, can you hear me?" Sierra blinked again. Her pupils tracked the room slowly, adjusting. Her mouth opened, and a sound came out. Not a word, more like a croak, but her vocal cords were working. "She's awake," someone whispered. Victor stepped forward, frozen in place. Sierra's eyes found him. She stared at her father for a long second. Her lips formed the word, "Dad." Victor's breath caught in his throat. Then she looked back at Tyrese. "Did you find the drawing?" Tyrese held it up. "Never lost it." The nurse's eyes were full of tears. Dr. Arwood scribbled furiously in a chart and called for a respiratory specialist. But Victor said nothing. He knelt beside his daughter, took her hand, and just held it. Sierra's fingers squeezed back. "I knew you were real," she whispered to Tyrese. A few hours later, the hospital released a carefully worded statement. "Patient Sierra Kensington has shown signs of consciousness and speech following extended unresponsiveness. Further evaluation is ongoing." But the news didn't wait for official language. Someone inside leaked a video. Just a few seconds of Sierra, eyes open, whispering Tyrese's name. The clip exploded. It played across TV networks, filled up social media feeds, landed on international sites. But the boy in the footage wasn't giving interviews or standing in front of cameras. He was sitting in the waiting room, sipping a juice box, trying to stay small. Victor eventually joined him. "She remembered you before she remembered me," he said quietly. Tyrese looked down. "She told me not to forget her, so I didn't." Victor studied the boy's face. "Do you know how rare that is?" How people forget each other in this world like it's nothing. Tyrese shrugged. I don't forget people who are nice to me. There aren't that many. Victor nodded slowly, unsure how to reply. Then, after a moment, you want to stay for a while? I can make that happen. Tyrese didn't answer right away. He looked through the hospital window toward the horizon. If she wants me to, Victor smiled, soft and tired. I think she already does. But even as the media circled and strangers speculated, what mattered most was already clear. The door had opened, and someone had been brave enough to walk through it. 3 weeks later, Sierra Kensington sat upright in her hospital bed, a thin blanket pulled to her waist and a tray of untouched mashed potatoes in front of her. Her voice was still quiet, her body still slow, but her mind? That was awake, sharp, and aware. She'd told the doctors bits and pieces of what she remembered, not the crash, not the water swallowing her whole. But what came after? The dreams were real, she said during a therapy session. I wasn't just asleep. I was somewhere, waiting, like being behind a locked door. And Ty, he was on the other side, knocking. Victor listened to her tell that story more than once. Each time he heard the same detail. I heard him calling me. He kept saying, "You're almost there." No one in the medical team could explain it. The science didn't add up, but Sierra didn't need proof. She'd lived it. And Victor had seen enough with his own eyes to stop trying to force logic where it no longer fit. Tyrese Mallory, for his part, didn't ask for anything. He spent most of those 3 weeks in a quiet wing of the hospital, housed temporarily under Victor's name. The lawyers called it protective accommodation. The media had tried everything: fake ID, delivery uniforms, bribing custodial staff, but none of them got close again. Leandra Duke came by twice to visit him, bringing clean clothes and books from the shelter's donation shelf. I heard the foundation's real now, she said during one visit. Tyrese looked up from the puzzle he was working on. What foundation? The one your name's on. Victor's building a program to help kids in the system. Real housing, medical care, school placement, all of it. Tyrese didn't say anything. He just focused on fitting the next puzzle piece in place. Outside, the world was still arguing. Theories bounced between daytime talk shows and conspiracy podcasts. Some insisted Tyrese had special gifts. Others said he was coached. A few loud voices accused the Kensingtons of orchestrating the whole thing to cover up the accident. But Sierra silenced all of them in a short, recorded statement that aired on her father's social media. He didn't heal me. He reminded me I wasn't forgotten. She wore no makeup. No PR team prepped her lines. She looked into the camera like she was talking to a single person. There are people who come into your life once and still leave something with you that never disappears. When I was 10, I met Tyrese. I drew him because he made me feel safe. I gave him a picture because he looked like he needed to be remembered. She paused. And when I couldn't come back on my own, he did. That was the end of most of the noise. The following week, Tyrese stood at the edge of a new house being prepared for him in a small suburb outside of San Antonio. It wasn't a mansion, just a quiet one-story with a backyard and a neighbor who waved from her porch. Victor didn't force anything. He offered gently. There's a place for you here if you want it. No strings. Just a chance. Tyrese asked one question. Can Sierra come visit sometimes? She's already planning it. He nodded once, not making eye contact. Then okay. The night before he moved in, Tyrese visited the hospital one last time. Sierra was being transferred to a private rehab center closer to the house. They sat together for a while, saying little. She finally broke the silence. Do you remember what you said? The last thing, before I woke up? He thought for a moment. Yeah. I said you were brave, even when you forgot. She looked down at her hands. I didn't forget. I just got tired. He smiled faintly. That's okay. I was tired too. She handed him a new drawing. Fresh paper. Same soft pencil strokes. This time it was of both of them, standing on opposite sides of a door. Hers was open. There's more on the other side, she said. Don't forget that. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Outside, the sun was going down. Some stories don't begin with introductions or end with conclusions. Some just pass through us like weather. Brief, unpredictable and unforgettable. And in a world that often forgets kids like Tyrese Mallory, he left behind something that couldn't be ignored. Proof that connection isn't always measured in years or blood, but in the voices we remember when everything else goes quiet. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away. Think about someone in your life who might feel forgotten. Reach out. Say their name. Be the voice that reminds them they're still here. And if you haven't already, subscribe. We've got more stories that deserve to be heard.